Hello, welcome back. So today we're going to be basically taking one glaze and creating two different tones with it by playing around with the density. I'm also going to look at how to use dry brushing techniques to create more texture in your work. I've got loads of bowls and mugs and all sorts of stuff I'll be glazing. So I'll talk you through the process of how I just prepare the glaze, how I check it, make sure it's all okay. And then what I do then is I split the glaze into two. I have one that's quite thick and one that's quite thin. And that's how I basically create some of the textures on my work. So I'll talk you through that process and yeah, let's go. The first thing to do is give your glaze a really good mix, especially if it's been sitting around for a couple of weeks. Now put your jug on the scales and zero them out. Now to work out the density, you're going to be dividing the total weight in grams by the total volume in millilitres. So I'm going to fill it right up to the 1000 ml mark, and I'm going to look at the weight. And you can see it's 1466 grams. So what I'm going to do, I'll take that number and divide it by the millilitres, which is 1000, and that gives me 1.46. So another example, if you got a smaller, say 500 ml jug, if you filled it up to say 350 ml mark, and that weighed 520 grams, you basically divide 520 by 350, and that'll give you your density. What I aim for is about 1.4, 1.45, and that's quite a thick glaze. And what I'll do then is once I've got that, that's going to be my glaze which I actually paint on with a hake brush. And then I'll basically measure out another batch of the glaze. So I'll pour that thick glaze into another bucket. I'll try and make a batch around about 1.25 to 1.3. It's less dense, and so basically it's a bit more watery. And what happens is where it's less dense, the actual colour of the glaze when fired will be slightly different. In my case, because I fire in reduction kiln, when the glaze is thinner, so a lot of the iron pulls through the glaze and it'll create these lovely sort of rusty colours. So with the thicker glaze, which is around about 1.4, 1.45, will give me more of a dense covering and it'll go more of a sage colour. So it's the same glaze, but it's actually giving me two different colours. A few different ways you can do it. You can either paint the thick glaze on first and just basically dry brush it and paint it on. Because a lot of my work has got facets or some kind of texture used with the trimming tool. When I dry brush with a thicker glaze, it actually just glides over the highlights, and over those highlights it goes a bit thicker. So you get more of a dense sort of coating of the actual glaze, which gives me more of the sage colours. And I'll leave the other areas bare clay, and then at the end I'll just dip the actual mug in the more watery, lower density glaze, and that area will basically give me more of a rusty orange colour. So I'm using the glaze in a way where I'm kind of controlling a little bit how I want the colour to be. So where I want it to be sage, I'll dry brush it a bit more, I'll put a bit more of the thicker glaze on, and the other areas I'll just leave bare clay, and then I will dip the whole thing into the lower density glaze. Another way to create texture is just to wipe away some of the glaze from the surface of the clay. And this jug is a really good example. You can see where I've wiped away some of the glaze, it's really highlighted some of the facets. So just experiment with this. Don't have the sponge too wet because you don't want to take too much of the glaze off. Just go nice and easy and just see how it goes. Whenever I throw cylinders, I always tend to have some throwing rings inside, and these actually really highlight with the dry brushing technique. So I handle bowls quite similar, but there's a few extra little techniques I use. I do the usual dry brush technique where I'll dip it in the glaze and wipe it off, and then just dry brush over the surface detail. So this is the thicker glaze, which will go more of a sage colour. Once I've dipped the whole bowl in the lower density glaze, that'll go more rusty orange. So again, I'm kind of painting and really taking in consideration the thickness of the glaze. So another technique is I get the brush really loaded with glaze and spatter it down Jackson Pollock style. And after that, I give it one single wipe with the large brush. The thing with this is you have to really not overthink it too much. You just have to really go for it and just really build confidence with your brush. As soon as you try to control it, it just doesn't work. So really just go for it and don't overthink it. So it's the same process with wood vases, really. I tend to use these as tests for glazes and glaze techniques. So you could use wood vases to practice on before you do the larger bowls and mugs, as they don't take that long to make, really. So just treat them as experiments. So now these are all glazed, I'll leave them on the shelf overnight and I'll start packing the kiln tomorrow. I'll talk to you more about packing the kiln. I've got quite a big gas kiln and I'll be talking a little bit more about how I fire it and the schedule and things like that, and I'll talk to you about the actual kiln in a bit more detail. So these will now be left, and this is what it looks like now, and this is what it looked like when it's fired. So it'll be like a kind of sage colour with hopefully some nice rusty areas like that. But have a little play around with using different densities. Check your density, have one glaze that's quite sort of low density and one that's quite high density, and leave areas that are like less dense or more watery and more dense and thicker glaze. So thanks for watching right to the end. Please do comment if you've got any questions or you want me to do any particular videos on anything else, and I'll be happy to try and do that over the next sort of few weeks or months. Please subscribe and like and comment. It really helps getting my videos out into the world of YouTube. So, well, good luck with the glazing, and I'll be back soon.